You go to work? Okay, well, I'm the temporary substitute chairman. So I would call this special meeting of the Alamance County Planning Board to order. I think our first item would be a roll call.
We take care of that.
We have that. We do have some that are running behind as their workday didn't end on a normal time, so I think they'll be on shortly. Public comments would be our next item. Do we have public
I
comments?
think Ron is the only one signed up. Ron, are you prepared to speak now, or do you want to speak later?
Can I speak later?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, so nothing right now.
So I suppose there are no responses to no comments. So the new business is the informational update on the snow camp zoning ordinance. And I suppose, Jay?
Yep.
You're
Jake Petrowski with Stewart. Been working with the steering committee and county staff on the snow camp ordinance. I have a presentation and then we can get into some sort of discussion, but feel free to stop me at any time. And we can talk about what you're seeing. Can you all see this screen well enough? See if my clicker did work earlier. Just go ahead and go. So the purpose of this meeting is to provide planning board and the board of commissioners an overview of the draft snow camp zoning ordinance, discuss the next steps, including additional opportunities for public input. There's a public meeting, and then during the adoption process, there's going to be a public hearing process as well. So this is really an informational meeting to give everyone an update on kind of where we are and kind of where the draft ordinance is. There's still some opportunities for revisions, and we're also getting some additional feedback really every day. so next slide. The agenda, I'll provide a little bit of overview of the project, talk about some highlights from the draft ordinance, talk about a little bit about public comments we've received, and then also some revisions we made in order to address those, and then talk about next steps after that. So the project itself began in the spring and really initiated by the adoption of the land development plan, which called for additional land use regulations in the snow camp area. And we had to work out the details. That was our charge. We worked through the summer and fall and have a draft ordinance. We worked with the steering committee and met with them a number of times. And we wanted to make sure it was far enough along before we kind of involved the planning board and board of commissioners. But the handoff, so to speak, between the steering committee and the planning board and board of commissioners is approaching. So what we really want to do is use December to make some more revisions. We're going to try to have a public meeting. We don't know if we're going to be able to sneak it in before the Christmas holiday, or whether it's going to be after the first of the new year. But you should have an update on the process at your regular meeting in January. And then the adoption process, we can kind of talk about that. We're still working the details out with staff. So that's kind of the overall schedule. To the next slide. So just some highlights from the snow camp ordinance. This is about the third revision of it, but I'll talk a little bit about the purpose. Go ahead and go. The purpose of this ordinance is to create a decision-making process and approval process, and really a framework for land use and development regulation in the snow camp area. Also mitigate conflicts between potentially incompatible land uses, minimize negative impacts on the natural environment, and protect the local character, aesthetics, and quality of life. This is directly related to the county's stated vision and goals, protecting agriculture while allowing thoughtful growth and development. So this is what we're trying to clarify. If we go to the next slide. A couple of things happening in and around snow camp are important. I don't know if you saw in the paper today or yesterday that the mega site, it might have a tenant. Could be a Toyota plant, or it could be new 1,400 new employees right on the other side of Liberty. the county has grown pretty rapidly, really, since 2000. The new census numbers came out recently and show a really significant growth in the last 10 years, and that's continuing that growth from the previous 10 years. Thinking about how do we manage growth in different areas of the county and manage kind of high impact land uses is really the impetus for this. Just an overview of the ordinance. It establishes a decision-making process, including clarifying the planning board and board of commissioners' role in approving development in the snow camp area. And it's really focused on more intense development types, so major subdivisions and commercial developments and industrial uses. And it applies only to the greater snow camp area. It would not apply to the whole county. There is 4 zoning districts, each with allowable uses, and each use has some standards. There's review procedures defined, administrative review, legislative review and decision making, and then also quasi judicial. I'll go into a little bit more about the different review procedures in a minute. It also has some basic dimensional and design requirements for certain types of uses. It is not overly, it doesn't go into design requirements in great detail. It's not meant to be a very restrictive zoning ordinance like you would see in a city, right? The snow camp area is a rural area. It doesn't have access to water and sewer. The types of development that are likely to come are not the same as, say, a Burlington or something like that. So it is more focused on the larger, higher intense uses, the uses with potential conflicts, and it doesn't go into that too much. So it also includes transitional provisions and addresses non-conformities, and I'll talk a little bit about that, but basically says that what's going on right now can continue. It's meant to provide a transition between the current land use and regulatory framework and the new zoning ordinance. Go to the next slide. That's good. There's 4 districts. One is the agricultural district, which covers the majority of the area. And that district is really meant to support and protect agriculture and related uses from more intense development, but also accommodate some like commercial development and some residential development as well at lower densities. There's a rural residential zoning district that allows low density neighborhoods. It also has a rural cluster option that allows some flexibility in lot size in exchange for preservation of open space and some other unique features on the site. There's a rural business district that encourages small scale commercial businesses. And this district actually includes most of the commercial establishments down there right now. And then the industrial district, which is appropriate for industrial uses where performance standards are also met according to other sections of the UDO, namely section 6.5 that deals with heavy industrial uses. These uses will require rezoning from their current use, and many uses require an additional step for approval, a special use permit, and as the draft is currently written. So this is a map of the draft zoning map, the current version as of yesterday. You can see the darker green areas are the agricultural areas. That is the predominant zoning district in the area, and that includes pastures and fields, but also timberland, a lot of timberland. But there are some residential uses in there and some other uses too. Then the lighter green area is that rural residential district. This includes some of the lower density residential subdivisions that are in the area. And then there's a rural business district, the pink areas, and you can see those kind of fall on existing commercial uses predominantly. There are a few industrial properties and those are covering existing or approved industrial uses. Go to the next slide. A key part of this ordinance is providing a framework for land use and development, but it's not to prohibit existing uses from continuing. That's not really a focus of the ordinance. So the traditional provisions in the ordinance and a non-conforming uses section of the ordinance really just says existing uses can continue within the existing footprint without any change. Some examples of these non-conformities are, well, you have a residential property, but it's on a lot that's a little bit smaller than the minimum lot size in the district, or a non-residential use that has been occurring for a long time and really has not caused any issues in a residential area. We have a lot of these small businesses that they're operating in rural areas, and we want those to continue. But we have some flexible provisions. So if you have a house on a lot that's smaller than the minimum lot size, if something happens to that house, you can rebuild that house. And there's administrative flexibility to continue uses and rebuild structures, even if it's impinging on a setback or something like that. So there's a lot of flexibility for those types of things. And really, a zoning ordinance compliance is only needed for changes of uses or expansions of uses. So that's done so that, again, existing uses can continue. If you have a business and you're going to expand by a very significant portion, then you would have to come into compliance with the ordinance. Another really important thing to say is that agricultural uses are exempt from zoning per state law. So this zoning ordinance is not going to negatively affect all the agricultural uses in the area. In fact, one of the reasons why we're doing this ordinance is to protect agricultural uses from potentially new uses that could conflict with existing operations. And some of those include, high impact industrial uses or large scale residential development that can have a negative impact on existing agricultural uses. So getting into the details a little bit, there's 3 different types of decisions that are in this ordinance. There's an administrative decision or approval that is an objective decision meant to implement or administer development regulations. Some subdivision approvals in this current ordinance would be administrative. So if you meet the criteria and you meet the minimum lot sizes and overall density requirements and the other design requirements, it would be administrative. Legislative is another type of decision. This is a policy decision, really, that the Board of Commissioners would get to make to adopt, amend, or repeal a law or ordinance. An example of this is a rezoning. Rezoning is amending the zoning map. So this is a legislative decision that the planning board would make a recommendation, and the Board of Commissioners would have a final say in approving or denying that legislative rezoning. There's also a quasi-judicial approval process, and this is a subjective discretionary decision based on evidence presented in an evidentiary hearing regarding a specific application of development. This is kind of a more formal process, and that a special use permit would go through the quasi-judicial process. And you can see that each level of decision has different kind of public participation and predictability and expense risk for the private sector, with the quasi-judicial being the highest expense, biggest hurdle for approval. So this is just a kind of a flow chart of those different decision types. If I'm a landowner and I would like to develop my land for a reason, it would fall into one of these 3 buckets. The approval process would utilize 1 or 2 of these approval processes. One is administrative with staff review and decision, and then there can be an appeal, through the Board of Adjustment or the body functioning as Board of Adjustment. There's a legislative process that staff reviews. A planning board makes a recommendation, and then there's a legislative hearing by the Board of Commissioners to approve or deny that. And then there's a quasi judicial process where staff reviews it, and then there's an evidentiary hearing that is required, and then appeal of that goes to the Superior Court. To give an example of these, the next slide, the administrative example is an administrative approval of a residential subdivision, and with no rezoning required. I'm in the R1 district. I'm proposing a subdivision of my land that meets the design criteria, and it would not require rezoning. It would go through administrative approval. Ordinance compliance permit is another example of this for a new home-based business. I have a property and I want to start a new home-based business. That's another thing we're really flexible in, and people starting new home-based business in rural areas, as long as it doesn't conflict with their neighbors. So there's some basic standards for that. An example of a legislative decision is rezoning from agricultural to R1 for a major subdivision that's more dense than is allowed in the agricultural zoning district. This would be a legislative decision, and the planning board and Board of Commissioners would get to weigh in on that. Another example is rezoning from R1, a residential district, to RB, or the rural business district. And that could just be a legislative rezoning. There's also a few types of uses that are conditional rezoning, so that the Board of Commissioners can apply conditions to the approval. They can approve or deny, or they can approve with conditions for certain uses. And then the quasi-judicial example in the draft ordinance is a special use permit that's required for certain heavy industrial land uses in addition to rezoning. So rezoning would have to happen, and then a special use permit process would be required for approval of certain class 3 high impact land uses. So I have a couple of hypotheticals to kind of walk through this. It takes a couple of different ways to kind of explain how this works, but hypothetical 1, my land is zoned R1, and I'm proposing a subdivision that meets the density and design requirements permitted in R1. So I apply, and if I have all my materials together, staff reviews it, and then I get a decision. I'm approved, and that's pretty much how that works. The table of permitted uses is just an example of from the ordinance. Each use is either permitted for the P in that district, or permitted with standards, or a special use permit is required, or conditional zoning required, or not permitted. The dash is not permitted. So you can see that for single family dwellings, they are permitted in ag at R1, but they're not permitted in RB or the industrial district. So that's kind of how that works. So again, if density and design meet standards for either conventional, or there's a rural cluster subdivision option that allows smaller lots in exchange for preservation of open space, then it's going to be approved. It's not a legislative decision. As long as you meet the criteria, you're approved. No rezoning is needed. The next slide. This is just an example of the dimensional criteria and overall density requirements for those different districts. You see the ag district has a maximum density of 1 dwelling per 5 acres and minimum lot size of 3 acres. R1 is 1 unit per 2 acres with 1.25 acre minimum lot size, and that was developed based on looking at the size of existing properties in the study area. And then there is a rural cluster option for the R1 district that allows smaller lots, but you have to preserve some open space on site, so that you have smaller lots, but you're preserving some of the character of the area. Go to the next slide. Hypothetical number 2 is a single family subdivision rezoning. In this instance, a density of a subdivision is proposed that's not permitted in agriculture. So I want smaller lots, and it's currently allowed in the agricultural district. A rezoning to R1 would be needed. I submit my application. Staff reviews it. Planning board makes a recommendation, and then there's a legislative hearing by the Board of Commissioners, and they either approve or deny my request for a rezoning. So that's how something would work. It's a more traditional, larger scale subdivision. And during that process, the planning board has to review and make a recommendation. So they would review the consistency statements that are provided for proposed rezoning. So that would be, those statements will be prepared by staff and say, you know, if this is in line with our plans or not, and here's why. And this is a staff recommendation. Planning board can take that as input, and then this planning board makes a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners. Board of Commissioners reviews the recommendation of the planning board and consistency with adopted plans, the compatibility with adjacent properties, compliance with regulations, and then makes a decision to approve or deny the rezoning. Hypothetical number 3, this is just home-based business. I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about this. We want to be really flexible related to home-based businesses because there's quite a few in the area, and we want to support them. Existing businesses, if you're not expanding, no permit is going to be required to continue operating. You're good to go. If you're expanding significantly, or if it's a new business, you might have to get a zoning compliance permit, depending on what you're proposing, or a rezoning may be required. But there's a couple different ways we treat home-based business. There's exempt ones that don't require any permit, and no one really knows they're operating. There's neighborhood ones that are smaller scale and less employees, and then there's rural home-based businesses that are on larger properties, and our standards are much more flexible for those. Just to give you an example, if you go to the next slide, the rural home occupation standards, administrative approval if these standards are met. Some standards like you have to have a certain size lot. You must live on premises. There's an employee cap of 3 additional employees. Some screening requirements if you have lots of outdoor storage, or you can only display goods of certain height and that sort of thing out of the right of way. Limited hours, and then also some size limitations and setback requirements for those. We looked at a number of different counties for kind of inspiration for those rural home occupation standards, really leaning towards the more flexible standards. A couple counties that we were looking at included Cabarrus County was one that we thought was kind of a similar situation. So another hypothetical rezoning for new retail, say the property is zoned R1, so residential district, and we want to open some sort of retail establishment. So if it's not allowed in R1, which you go to the table of permitted uses and you look at R1, and retail buildings are not allowed there. So you have to rezone to rural business. So application would be submitted, staff would review it, a recommendation by the planning board, and then there would be a legislative hearing by Board of Commissioners. So that's how that would work. You go to the next slide. Again, the planning board would review and recommend. They review consistency statements for proposed rezoning, and they make a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners. The Board of Commissioners is looking at consistency with adopted plans, compatibility with adjacent properties. And again, if it is a conditional rezoning, so buildings over 10,000 square foot are actually conditional rezoning in the draft ordinance. So this is one thing that we heard from people during the development of the land development plan, but also as public input that we had in Snow Camp, is there's concern over large scale commercial buildings, not so much smaller scale things, but so we set a threshold. If you're under 10,000 square foot, it's just a rezoning. If it's over 10,000 square foot, it's a rezoning, but it's a conditional rezoning. So approval, the board could actually attach conditions to that to make it a little bit more compatible. That could be related to lighting, that could be related to where the parking is, or screening, or whether there's adequate access or that sort of thing. So we did that to kind of really encourage the smaller scale stuff and give the planning board and Board of Commissioners a little bit of tools to deal with bigger things. We're not saying you can't come, but there might be some more standards to make sure it doesn't upset the neighborhood. So that was retail. Go to hypothetical number 6. This is industrial rezoning and special use permit. The current zoning designation for this example is agriculture. Property owner wants to rezone to industrial. So if you, in this case, I think we're using an asphalt plant. So go to the next slide. So the question is an asphalt plant permitted in ag in the current ordinance, the draft? You look at the table of permitted uses and you see that if the zoning is ag, then asphalt plants are not permitted in the ag district. So I'll rezone to the industrial district. So next slide. The planning board would review and make a recommendation. There would be review of consistency statements for the proposed rezoning. Is it consistent with the land development plan? Is it compatible with the character of surrounding areas? It makes a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners. The Board of Commissioners reviews consistency with adopted plans, compatibility with adjacent properties, and compliance with regulations, and then makes a legislative decision whether to approve or deny that rezoning. And then with this particular case, this is, if you look at the table of permitted uses, it has an S there under asphalt plant. So that's a special use permit that's required in addition to the rezone. So that's another hurdle where application, staff review, and there's an evidentiary hearing whether that is approved. In addition, some industrial uses have to follow the standards in the high or the heavy industrial development section of the ordinance, which has minimum lot sizes and some screening requirements and stuff like that. So, so that's kind of how that would work. And then there's a whole set of approval criteria for the special use permit in addition to that rezoning. Is it located and designed proposed to maintain public health, safety, and welfare? Does it comply with all required regulations? Is it located and designed to maintain or enhance the value of contiguous property? Is use of the site include screening, buffering, landscaping that harmonizes with adjoining properties? Is the type, size, or intensity of proposed uses will not have a significant impact on adjoining properties, and conditions could be attached to this that help the project harmonize as well during the special use permit process. And also, does necessary public and private facilities and services serve it adequately? So there's a whole set of approval criteria for that special use permit. That is kind of an overview of the draft. We did hear some feedback from folks during our public meeting that we had in Snow Camp, and then also after the public meeting through public comments. There's a way to submit comments on the website, and we've been talking with the steering committee about what we heard, and also some changes. Some of the changes that we made based on public feedback was we added that conditional zoning process for certain uses. And that was done because the conditional zoning process allows for more dialogue between the applicant, the planning board and board of commissioners, and the applicant, and then also the public. So there's some dialogue there that you can get to, okay, well, what would make this more compatible? And that's an open process. So conditional zoning is currently an ordinance for like mobile home parks and campgrounds and larger scale commercial. Those would be the conditional zoning process. We added public notification procedures for legislative and quasi judicial processes. These procedures are identified in state law, but we put it in the ordinance so that it was clear. We updated the table of permitted uses in industrial to match the old HIDO classes in the current high impact or heavy industrial development section of the ordinance, just for kind of usability sake. We also relaxed some regulations on residential and commercial properties. One thing that we heard during the process is we don't really need to be regulating residential and small scale commercial so much. That's not really an issue. So let's be a little more flexible there. So we took some of the requirements out for there. Right now, we're double checking some cross references between this ordinance, this Snow Camp Zoning Ordinance, which actually will be an article inside the Unified Development Ordinance. So we want to make sure that all the cross references to different sections of that ordinance are clear. And also, since we're we're kind of building on that section 6.5 that talks about different standards for heavy industrial development. We want to make sure that it's clear that it has to, the development in the industrial district also has to meet that criteria for the heavy in industry section. So that's kind of an overview. One thing I'll just mention a little bit on is the public notification. There's different types of notifications required based on what decision type is being pursued. So, and some things require a published notice, some things require a mailed notice, some things require a posted notice, and some things require all three. So if you go to the next slide, this just kind of lays out when a published notice is adequate versus mailed notice and posted notice. And I don't think we need to get into the details here, but it's specified, and this is kind of in line with state law. So the couple things that I'll mention to kind of close here before we get into any questions and discussion are just some discussion topics that the steering committee has been grappling with. I think that you know, we went through several iterations of the draft, and our most recent meeting, there was a couple things that came up that we're still kind of working with staff and seeing how best to address. One is agri-tourist homes, another is co-housing developments, and I'll talk a little bit about these, and then how to treat heavy industrial uses in the snow camp area. So I have a slide on each of these. First one being agri-tourist homes. It was mentioned that increasingly, you know, there's this kind of movement towards farm stays and Airbnbs, and it can be a way to diversify the income of farms and that sort of thing. So we need to be thinking about it and being kind of proactive and making sure that we accommodate that. A good thing is, you know, tourist homes, or if I have a property and it's a bona fide farm, and I want to build a tourist home, I can build a home on my property and it's exempt from zoning as long as the structure meets state building code. So that's okay. If I'm going to subdivide my property, then I would need to go through the subdivision process, meet subdivision criteria, and then potentially rezone or not rezone, depending on how big the property was and how many homes I'm subdividing and that sort of thing. So that would go through that process. The draft ordinance does currently not include a provision for non-farm tourist homes without subdivision. But we could research that a little bit more, but that's kind of where we are. So there's a couple things that are accommodated, and those would be the processes for it. But you know, there's no instance where if it's a 20-acre property and I want to build 4 tourist homes and it's not a bona fide farm, then you would probably have to go through the subdivision process currently. But we can look into that if that's something that we really want to accommodate. If we go to the next slide. So there's a new trend in housing. It's called co-housing, and it's where it comes in different forms, but there's a certain portion of the property that is jointly owned and maintained, and then you either rent or lease or own a building or a home on that property. So, and this is an example of a co-housing development in Person County on the Durham County line, Elderberry Farms. So you see that in the picture up top, there's a number of homes, actually there's a duplex or two around a common space, and they're on really small lots, but it's on a bigger property that's agricultural in nature. So in this case, they own 2 10-acre tracts and then have, you know, a handful of homes that are kind of around a common space. There's a garden, there's a community building, that sort of thing. So, and if we want to do co-housing in Alamance County under the current ordinance, you could have multiple dwellings on a property that's greater than 10 acres. If it's a bona fide farm, and they would be exempt from zoning, but the structure would have to meet NC building code. If lots are individually owned in less than 10 acres, then subdivision would be required under the current ordinance. And you could use a rural cluster option and have smaller lots and that sort of thing. But draft standards could be modified with that in order to be more flexible and accommodate more of that. And we're looking at Person County's ordinance, and they have a 10-acre property minimum lot size, and I think we had a 20-acre in the draft ordinance. So that could be adjusted. And then also they don't have a minimum lot size at all related to their rural cluster option. And that's to provide maximum design flexibility. It's dependent on figuring out the water and septic situation. So anyway, so that's co-housing. It's kind of a new thing, but we're thinking about that. The last thing that there was a lot of debate on, and maybe some of the steering committee members want to kind of chime in, but it's about heavy industrial uses in snow camp. The current draft of the ordinance requires rezoning and a special use permit for most class 3 industrial uses, including mining, racetracks, asphalt plants, and paper mills. It does not require the special use permit for a couple other ones like sawmills. We thought sawmills was appropriate for being in a rural area, so that would not require a special use permit. There are alternatives to this current approach. Right now, I think that we are improving the decision process. We're creating a decision process right now, whereas the current ordinance, if you meet certain criteria, then you're automatically, you can do that use. Here we have 2 decision steps. One is the legislative rezoning, and then the other one is the special use permit process for certain types of uses. There is an alternative, and that would be to not permit certain uses in the snow camp area. So instead of having the S in the table of permitted uses for special use permit required, you would just have a dash and it would not be allowed. The steering committee members discussed this a lot, and I think they're split on how to approach that. Some in favor of eliminating those uses altogether, not allowing them in snow camp, and then some that would like to keep them as being allowed, but with the 2-step approval process. So that's something that I just want to bring up, and if anybody wants to kind of add to that and kind of get into that when we talk about the questions, we certainly can. One more slide, and then we can get into discussion. What's our next steps with this? This is kind of the special planning board meeting, the public workshop. We're trying to do that coming up either on the 20th or waiting till after the Christmas holiday. Then January, February would be planning board and board of commissioners meetings. There would be a public hearing as part of the adoption process there. So that's kind of where we are, and we can kind of get into questions.
One quick question. You may have, I'm sure you covered this, but just so I'm clear, in ag districts, is there a minimum lot size inside the ag districts? And that was 3 acres, is that correct?
Yes.
So in a scenario where, say, my father-in-law was wanting to give me a piece of property of 2 acres, what would be the process of being able to get that to get that approved?
Well, there is a variance process if you can prove hardship. Ideally, it would just be 3 acres though, unless we have an exemption for family subdivisions or something like that, which is something we could look into. And some counties do have that. That if it's a certain number of lots and it's staying with family, then you can provide an exception.
Just one lot, just digging a piece of property to a family member would still have to be 3 acres without having to go through that whole approval process.
But you wouldn't have, it would be an administrative approval.
Administrative.
It wouldn't, as long as it's 3 acres.
But less than 3 acres, 2 acres.
If it's less than 2 acres, then there's a process, but you would have to request a variance.
And that process would be done at the administrative or legislative level.
That would be a quasi judicial board of adjustment. Yeah, would do that. And it'd be difficult to prove, a hardship unless there are certain circumstances. But if that's something that you wanted us to look into and providing a family exemption or something like that, we can look into doing that.
I was just thinking about my own personal experience. That's what my father-in-law did for me and my wife. It's a 2 acre lot. And it's because of just what he wanted to do for us, because he's thinking about his son and his other daughter in the future, maybe giving them some property too. So that process that happened for us would not be able to happen now. It would be a much more difficult process to be able to work out, I'm assuming now.
Yeah, unless we do some sort of family exemption for a subdivision. And I've seen that elsewhere. In order to accommodate that sort of thing, it's a certain number of lots. It caps it to, you can only do that for a certain number of lots.
Right.
And then there's more flexibility.
Okay.
Yeah, and part of it is minimum lot size in parts of the county is guided by watershed minimum. Critical
Right.
watershed, we can't go below 2 acres no matter what. And the balance of watershed is 1 acre, but those things would trump anything else we have in the ordinance.
Just seems to me personally that 3 acres is a pretty large lot size for a minimum inside a family, inside a family situation.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at it a number of different ways. I mean, we were looking at the ag area as, what is appropriate for the agricultural area. And the average lot size is 11 acres.
Yeah,
Um,
Of course, it's in that area, right?
Yeah, so that's why, we wanted to, set that as a pretty high bar. You could, get rezoned to R1, that would also be a menu, but that would be a legislative process, which would probably be better than going to the Board of Adjustment for a variance. And that, I don't think there would be any problem with that, but that's kind of how we did it. I mean, we wanted to, I think it was goal to protect agriculture and set a pretty, high minimum lot size. But those minimum lot sizes are really subject to the planning board and board of commissioners approval at this point, right? I mean, we put what in the draft ordinance, a recommendation, right? And that was 3 acres for the agricultural area and 1.25 acres for the R1 district. Now, is there, they're informed by data and that sort of thing, trying to meet character, but is there anything to say that you couldn't have it, change that minimum lot size in the ag area to 2 acres? Certainly.
Or just allow some flexibility in family situations.
We're allowed, there's a couple different ways to kind of accommodate that. Yeah.
Right. So I see the benefit to having that lot size in ag districts, but I'm concerned with family situations that being too restricted personally.
Yeah, well, it's the same thing with my family. My father-in-law did the same thing for me. Cut out of 1.75 acres of,
Right.
it was an existing house, but we cut the lot and enough area for, septic tank repair area. And it was not 3 acres. It's still not 3 acres. So, but it's, it's surrounded by family land.
Yeah. So,
Thank you for your explanation.
yeah, I mean, that's certainly something, and like I said, I mean, there's different ways to accommodate that. One would be, changing the minimum lot size. Another one would be looking at, exemptions for family subdivisions.
Thank you for explaining. I appreciate it.
What else? Any other questions?
Just I have a couple questions. What's draft? I'm going through it pretty good. In the, let's see, what is it? D, the section for ordinance and amendment, text amendment.
Mhm.
I had a question down there in rezoning map amendment on D, and just says here whether the proposed change tends to improve the balance uses to meet specific demand in the county. So what would qualify as a specific demand in the county to change an ordinance?
Well, I mean, if you think about rezoning to commercial, right? If there's a need for, commercial in the area and there's a demonstrated need through a number of different ways, that could be one way the planning board and board of commissioners consider, in favor of that. Like there's a need for this. Or if, somebody wanted to create a business park, down towards Liberty to kind of have some support industries, whether that's like auto body shop or suppliers or something like that in support of the mega site or something like that. That would, could be justification for approving it. And the board would, look at, well, there's a need, yeah, but they would also probably look at other things. Is it compatible with what's around it? Depending on where it is, does it have good access? Is it situated in the right location? You don't want to put something like that on a small road that's hard to get to and you have to go through a neighborhood to get to it, right? So that would be one of the things that could be weighed in support of the map amendment.
Ever since I got involved with this, my biggest concern has been the NC Carolina Core. We spoke about that, right? And now that stuff's starting to come to fruition, right? They got stuff in Guilford, And I think Lee, you sent me an article, it's gonna start happening in Cab too. So, I guess, when we talk about the specific demands, would it still have to meet design criteria, or will we be changing design criteria within that specific area?
It would have to meet design criteria, but again, this draft ordinance has some basic design criteria for certain uses, some buffering and screening, and that sort of thing. It's not overly complicated. Like we're not going to require, street trees or decorative walls or building material. I mean, there's a lot more that you can do.
Some of that first draft stuff that.
Yeah, we toned it down quite a bit.
Okay. All right, and I went through quasi judicial and went through some of the approval criteria, and I just had some, when we talk about contiguous property, explain what the contiguous property and how that would affect a quasi judicial.
Contiguous property is just property that's adjacent to the proposed use. So that those property owners are required to be notified if something comes in.
And the use of development conforms with general plans or for the physical development embodies in the ordinance and adopted plans and the development regulations. So I circled physical development.
Can you highlight it where that is on the screen?
I didn't catch it. Could you repeat that, Bill? The section?
It's let's see, it's a criteria, it's C, or no, it's D. D down there where it says,
Still in quasi judicial?
yeah, your D may not match with my D.
Okay.
Development
No,
conform-
Yeah, that's it. That's it. So the use of development conforms with general plans for the physical development as embodied by the ordinance.
Sorry.
I think that's just.
Try to keep up, I dare you.
I think that's a long way to say, I think that's a long way to say, as long as it is in line with other plans you have for that area. So in a lot of cases, you might have kind of a general, like a land development plan, but then you might have a corridor study that was done for, 87 or something, and there's a more detailed thing. So it has to conform with the physical layout of like an intersection or something that was designed or that kind of thing.
Okay. Let's see. And the next one there is, I had just a question about the location, arrangement, and use of the site, screening, buffering, landscape, and the pedestrian particular ways harmonize with the adjoining properties in the general area and minimize adverse impacts. So how would we address that?
So this comes into play, whenever you're doing a conditional rezoning or special use permit. One of the things a couple things you can do to make, something that's, maybe it's an industrial building, or maybe it's a large scale commercial operation. You can use screening and buffering to, hide the worst of what's going on, buffer the noise or any light impacts that you have, that sort of thing. So this is just saying that is the site that's proposed using these tools that you have, the screening, buffering, landscaping, putting the vehicular access for parking in the right location to where it's not right up against somebody's bedroom or something like that. So that's kind of what this is about.
Give Commissioner somewhere to go with some of that stuff.
Right, they could say, well, you really need to put the entry road in a different location, or you need to move the parking away from that church or whatever it is.
I particularly like your subparagraph G, that we can use, look at what's available now and make it accommodate that.
Right, and you see, this resulting in, some, potentially near site improvements, whether it's a turn lane or something like that, if it's needed. And this creates a process to kind of talk about some of that stuff.
Okay, so another thing I had going through the slides, when you were going through the rezoning process, say from an agricultural to an industrial, would they need to prove to meet the standards first before you, say you come up with a plan, you got 100 acres and you want to put this in. And you either go for do you go for a rezoning first, or do you say, hey, I want to see your plot plan? Tanya looks at it and see if it's even going to be compliant within the uses.
Well,
In particular, it's going to be a class 3, obviously.
yeah, if it's class 3, then the rezoning would happen, and then during the special use permit, there might be some additional details that are provided and discussed. But the legislative process by itself does not require a site plan. Now, conditional zoning does include a site plan option. So that's where, if it's a larger scale retail, it would be good to kind of have that site plan so that, conditions can be realistic, right?
Yeah, I'd like to almost see, they have to, that property is going to meet standards first before they even consider a rezoning. Because there was a situation in Lexington, a good number of years, that the city was sold on rezoning something, and you're not going to use it for this, are you?
Yeah.
No, sir, I'm not going to use it for that. Well, after he got the approval for the rezoning, he did something different.
And that depends on what we're requiring for the application. And there's different ways to go about doing that. And it would have to meet basic standards of ordinance, but depending on what we do in terms of application procedures and what's required for different things, there are different ways to do
That feels like condition, I'm gonna say my hand was raised, conditional zoning was my favorite of the picks to really use a lot, because I feel like this board is being new and you really want to get your hands in it and you want the details. That conditional zoning gives you that. They're stuck with whatever you approve. They want to change their mind and do something different, well, they get to come back again, and we're gonna know exactly what they're doing when they leave the room.
Yeah.
All our questions get to be answered. The straight rezoning, you give them a lot of options, everything on the permitted uses table, pick whatever you wanna do, we gotta be comfortable with that. Conditional zoning allows us still to stay in a legislative kind of feeling, but not go and give them all the permissions they want.
It gives them just that specific use of the property.
And exactly, we gotta see exactly what we wanna see on there. If you want the parking moved, if you want the driveway moved, you want a different freaking tree there, you can ask for that. You can control their operation hours within reason. You can do a lot of different things and protect the neighbors.
Yeah.
That's what this whole thing is about. Zoning is to help keep dislike things being together.
Yeah, I'd be more in favor of that, rather than just having a straight rezoning, blanket rezoning first. I think the conditional part would be much more appropriate for almost everything.
That's why you see a lot on there. I like that a lot. I think it gives us what we're looking for.
And I mean, there are a lot of benefits to the conditional zoning process. We're using it for some of those commercial uses, and mobile home parks and campgrounds, that sort of thing. Right now, the current ordinance does use the rezoning and special use permit process for industrial uses. And that's just it's a higher bar to meet, and kind of and we heard that some folks wanted to discourage some of those uses, so that's where we're going. But it could be that some of those industrial uses, we could change some of them to conditional zoning if that's the preference of the planning board and board of commissioners.
Yeah, but we did write it on purpose to have multiple hurdles to get through for the really big types of projects, because we want that ability to not allow what we don't want. And that special use permit process, that's a stringent process. That's followed by state law. It gives you ability to approve within reason, but it gives you lots of reasons of what they have to meet in order to get that through. It's kind of tough on purpose.
The other thing I came up with was a couple of things, but the health department, where do they come into play when we're trying to decide on residential use?
Well,
in the countryside, I mean,
they have to permit whatever septic system that you're using.
Right.
So like I said, we have a 20,000 square foot minimum lot size for that rural cluster option. Knowing that it's gonna be hard to get a septic tank permitted on something smaller than that. Now, you could do away with that and just say, well, you can have it as small as you want, as long as it gets permitted by the health department, because this is all assuming that that's gonna get permitted by the health department. So that's how they come in. And for instance, in Person County example, they didn't have traditional septic tanks for that elderberry farm. They had a septic system. There's a community septic system that still had to be permitted by the health department. So in that case, they're really the approving party for that septic system.
Something very similar when we did that little small house.
The tiny home park.
Yeah, the
down
tiny
there.
house.
Creedmoor Meadows.
Yeah.
But we did establish lots and stuff through the whole park ordinance for that.
Okay.
Steve, did you have a question?
Yeah, I have consistently gotten questions and concerns raised by some of our people in the farming community that what happens when the family no longer wants to farm the farm? And our children, our grandchildren, our great grandchildren, wherever it reaches that point, decides they want to put that property up for sale to somebody to build a subdivision, to build a rock quarry, who knows?
Yeah.
Find somebody that wants to buy that specific piece of property. How much more difficult, I guess, is their question for them to transition that property from the agricultural status that it's in now, or that it would be with zoning after the zoning process?
Well, I mean, one of the things that we're trying to balance here is protecting existing residents, but also providing flexibility for people to sell the property and develop the property. I mean, that's what we're trying to do, is balance these things, and that's why we have come up with the rural cluster option that kind of allows smaller lots and more flexibility in terms of design, but also preserving kind of some of the feel of the area. The fact of the matter is, I mean, there's literally thousands of acres down here, and we can accommodate 25,000 homes down in the Snow Camp area if we want.
Sure hope not.
But even under these regulations, like these are not very, this is not
There.
Thank you, Eric.
So I mean, the fact of the matter is, I mean, there still can be a significant amount of growth and development in this area. We're just trying to balance,
Right.
existing interests and I don't know, is it 95% of other counties in North Carolina? This is how, it's done. I mean, there's typically a rezoning and it's fairly, an accepted process in most other counties, especially of your size.
And growth, yeah.
In the state.
I understand the situation there. I think that it's there's a tradition in Alamance County of not telling somebody what they can or can't do with their farm. And people are real concerned about being put in a position where they can't. They're not, they may not want to get on a farm. We don't have any idea getting on a farm, but they really know their children, their grandchildren are probably not going to want to farm. They're going to go off into something else, and they don't want to be. They don't want to be in a situation, their children or grandchildren to be in a situation where the neighbors can decide what they can or can't do with that property.
Yeah.
And that's where you kind of get to with the whole zoning issue.
And I think my personal opinion is, and I've been on both sides of this fence with the zoning. I've gone to, when it was presented by David Owens under Amy's watch, and I thought, wow, man, this could work. And I've been on then the other side of the fence, man, is, especially at the first draft. Man, I was ready to say, hey, just chuck this out, man. This ain't no good. All right. So, but I've come around, and I think y'all have done a great job. I think y'all have done a tremendous job. I don't think that the zoning, it protects the properties in the meantime, but I don't think it really restricts what you can do with it in the future. It just kind of guides it in a certain massaging way to something that's compatible with the area. As the area changes and we've become a Morrisville or Cary over time, I know that was my fear from the NC Carolina Corps, exactly the same way, that this would then change and massage itself in a different direction over a period of time. Are we going to become Cary or Morrisville overnight? Heck no. It's going to become maybe 20, 30 years, who knows? Or it could happen in 10 years. You just don't know what's going to happen with our situation now. But I can see the benefit to protect, and then like what is Marines adapt, adjust, and overcome. And that's kind of what I think this thing will eventually morph to. I mean, currently, though, I think we're on the right track.
It's not meant to be a static document. It's not meant to, let's put our pencils down, come January, and it's approved, and it stays intact exactly the way it is for 20 years. Like, that's not the way it works. I mean, there's going to be things that Tanya is going to need to amend probably this spring, right? When she starts getting to use it, and that's something to be expected when we start kind of, using it and seeing kind of how it's being used. And, it's all about balance though. And even, going back to the, density maximums and minimum lot sizes, I think those could be adjusted, right? Like if they're, if the feeling is like they're a little bit too restrictive in some areas, then I mean, you can make some adjustments, or there could be a new zoning district added. This creates a framework for, land use regulation and decision making,
Right.
which right now, you do have a loose framework for land use regulation with the UDO, but the approval processes, there's not as many kind of checks and balances and approval processes that allows the Board of Commissioners to weigh in, and frankly, the public to provide substantive input that can affect a decision. And that's what we're trying to do.
Steve, I understand what your question is, because sitting on that side of the fence, we hear that quite often. It's what's the children have moved away. They're not interested. At the end of the day, if they choose to sell that property, it certainly can be sold. Sandy can tell you that. It's the buyer who's going to have,
That's right.
who's going to have to do the worry about the rezoning. The seller, those children, those heirs, that's not really of their concern.
Right.
It's the concern of the person buying it. And those people are well schooled in such processes that they understand, because as Jake says, in almost every other county in this state, they deal with it on a daily basis. As fast as we lose farmland, and that's a great concern to me, there's still too many zeros on a piece of paper that make it, hard to keep land in farming. I mean, it's just, that's where we are. Farmland preservation and things like that can help, but at the end of the day, if they want to get paid, I don't think this document is going to stop that from happening.
It seems like it's happened. It hasn't stopped growth in other areas that have zoning, that's for sure.
Yeah.
They,
I think it's
County,
important.
Orange County, they've grown.
Yeah, I think it's important to focus on that the intent of the document is to be protective and not restrictive. And it's to preserve the harmony, not create the discord. And I think if we try to focus from a more protective perspective versus what I can't do with it, it's what somebody else can't do beside me. So, I mean, there's some protection in there for all of us.
Right.
Yeah, there was, I guess some, as we talked, obviously, Ron brought it up. I know my wife said in comments to you about restricting or eliminating, and you touched base with it on class threes, which was probably what started this whole ball roll, right? So can't worry, and caught everybody by surprise, caught the county commissioner by surprise, caught everybody by surprise, right? So hence, fast forward 3 years, we got Untitled, here we're going through this small area plan. So there's been a lot of discussions about eliminating that kind of entity. Now, when we redid the hideout, Rand Lee was on that committee, and everybody voted for it, approved it and all that, right? With what I've seen of the property sizes, now not that that property can't be conglomerated together, right, purchased together, to get the setbacks and to get the land spacing, it would either take a hell of a lot of property, and they obviously, or they're in a position, they wouldn't be able to grow in that way anyhow.
What was the land spacing on those past three fields? Do you remember?
The land space is 1,200 feet, and the
From property
setbacks,
line?
right from the property line, and the setbacks 500.
Right.
So it's
And minimum-
essentially from
minimum
area of
property
operations
size,
is
yeah.
1,700 feet.
Yeah.
Where it used to be 2,000 from the center, and that was an arbitrary somewhere. I'll pick that dot, it's 2,000.
Mhm.
Probably was manipulated at some point, it's been neat, but in any case, that's, well, I've looked at all the properties down there, and they would either price themselves out of it, let's take an asphalt plant, for example, where you need 5 acres and all of a sudden they have to buy 40 already. And to get that land spacing and setback requirements with all the homes that we actually do, and with something that Ben put in there, no, what was that, no waivers or no, they couldn't get a waiver anymore or something like that, that the property, there wouldn't be enough, or they would price themselves. It just wouldn't be feasible for class
Right.
3. So I think a lot of the feeling is that it's not really feasible, then why don't you just eliminate it? And that would give some of the people in Allen or Southern Alamance that little breathing, never have to do that again. So that was some of that flavor on that.
And I have spoken with our legal team. They've got, we want some more detail of exactly what's being asked, because at the steering committee meeting, it was abolish industrial. That made them very uncomfortable. Sounds like now the level we're speaking of is, we're really specifically talking about class 3s. So once I take that back to Patrick tomorrow and let him know, then we can get a legal interpretation of, is that as uncomfortable, or are we feeling more comfortable from legal perspective? Because you don't want the county to be put in a bad situation for people who have a vested rights or right to develop their land, that kind of thing. That's a lot different than what we were first talking about. So that's worth, again, approaching Patrick and Deborah will look at it.
I mean, what we really need, probably gonna need is the planning board and board of commissioners to weigh in on how to approach that, because, like I said, the steering committee is split on that particular issue.
How closely are you guys working with Deborah and Patrick?
Patrick specifically, Patrick goes back to Deborah, but I speak with Patrick. So Patrick's already read this ordinance and he's given his comment. We've updated that. And I went to him about the steering committee things. So they're very impressed about what we're doing and how we're doing things. Like I said, they've seen the entire document and the map and everything.
I want you guys to understand, we as commissioners have not seen this document. So,
We're wanting to address these things and to get this input, and then we want to put this out for public review, commission review, everybody to have the ability, but we don't want to put a document out that we're not sure on and we don't have everything right. That's why it hasn't been released yet.
Well, it has evolved greatly over time.
It has. And the first step, as Bill said, we had a lot in there because we were trying to fill out what's important to the people in this area and to the steering committee. And once we found that out, we pulled things out. We actually have changed some things that seemed more important than what we wrote. That was on purpose.
And I think it's about to the point where we can make it public review and start with commissioner and planning board review. I mean, I think, it's gonna evolve and change over the next, month or two, but I mean, we've kind of went over it and it's pretty clear where it's going now.
another comment now?
Yeah.
When we first talked to the board of commissioners about this, it was different board of commissioners, except for Mr. Carter. And someday there'll be another board of commissioners and another and another and another, and they're gonna say, well, what is the problem with snow camp? They don't want this, they don't want that. what are they, miners or, what? So try to envision a future where we didn't have to worry about that so much. Having class 3 being not permitted, I think would be an important part of that. If at some point, the class 3 seems like it's an appropriate industry for snow camp area, then that would be the time to get the Board of Commissioners involved. Not to rezone a piece of property, but to change the plan. So instead of going the other way, to me, that makes a lot more sense, and that's what I would like to lobby for here. And by the way, I'm on the steering committee, snow camp resident. Those who don't know me, and most of you probably don't, then my name is Ron Spinhoven. So I think that's, something we have to look forward to, not this Board of Commissioners, not the next one maybe even, but somewhere down the line. We don't want to have to go through this again, because it's been terrible for many of us in the community. And at this point, it's going to get worse. People are already selling off their properties near the quarry site. You can look on Zillow and next door, you can see these addresses where they are. They're all within a mile or two of the quarry, and it's just all of a sudden where there was no inventory, now there's lots of inventory starting to come up. So there is this exodus starting in snow camp, which is a sad thing. But when we first tried to get this zoning going, the concept was to prevent these class 3 industries from coming in that were expanding. And that's what I would lobby to see happen here. Just want to give the current Board of Commissioners the perspective here, since you weren't here then.
We'll blame it all on Steve. He was like,
Yeah.
let me ask this, and I'm not challenging your statement at all, but from a realtor standpoint, are the areas around the quarry selling off now?
There are some, and I don't know how much of that to attribute to the quarry and how much of that to attribute just to the strong market right now. A lot of people are cashing in equity.
Yeah,
So I don't
my
know.
question is.
Yeah, I don't know how much to correlate to, but I will say they're selling. So the quarry has not had a negative impact at this point. But it could just be homeowners taking advantage of the strong real estate market right now.
Well, okay.
And I'm not trying to challenge.
No,
your
no,
statement.
I'm just saying that a month ago or so, there was no inventory in snow camp. You could not buy a house at snow camp. And then all of a sudden, and they're all in that area around the quarry, they're starting to sell, or starting to come up for sale.
We're hitting the same problem. We're right in the middle of soon to have reevaluation. And that's a process that's beginning right now. And we're seeing prices increase tremendously across the board. So I understand your comment about people wanting to sell because of the potential increase in value.
So I'm not saying it's not the
Well,
quarry.
if you're gonna sell, you better sell now.
Yeah.
I
Because
think
you're
you're
gonna have
right.
a harder time selling for the price you want to
Yeah.
get. And
But we have a lot of people, as from a realtor standpoint, that have no intention of selling regardless of where they are in the county, that are all of a sudden, I'm gonna sell and I'll figure out my plan B because I want to cash in on that equity. So I don't know how much to attribute to the quarry
It's hard to tell,
versus.
And I'm
I
not trying to
was looking at
challenge
the addresses just last week.
Yeah.
Right around there.
I'm not trying to challenge your statement at all. I'm trying to understand
Yeah.
what the motivations are.
So based on that idea, what is legally what can be done? If we say we are gonna outlaw those types of things, does that put us in a legal
I have a
situation?
lot of confidence in the new legal team that we have. And I want to, listen to them carefully.
Yeah, I mean, I don't
I've
want to
been
set the
involved
county
in-
up for a series of lawsuits when everybody comes along and says, well, you can't do that, and here's why. You know, I don't know. I don't know what the law is. I'm just saying.
That's what Patrick asked. Patrick works with Deborah. Patrick specifically helps me because he does a lot of land use stuff. And he knows a lot about the legislative, the quasi-judicial, he knows this stuff really well. So now that we've got a clear basis, we can get a better understanding of legally what that would look like.
I mean, I understand what Ron's saying, and not that I disagree with that, but on the other side of that, do we want to set ourselves up for litigation for the next ever how long it is that,
Well,
you know?
maybe the question is there precedent elsewhere in the state?
Right, I mean, I don't know.
And
And
there,
that's what they would research. And then I think they'll give us clear, but also very, very careful and confident advice.
I mean, let me ask this question hypothetically, Jake, since we love that. I do like the fact that we can have cabins down there beside the river now on the farm.
Yeah.
I do. I like that answer. But what I mean is, well, what was I going to say? The situation with this industry, and I can't even think of how I want to put it. Go on to something else. I'll think about it in a minute.
Well, we've talked a lot, I know, like, Lee has property, Vaughn has property, I have some property, but, we're smaller home. He has more property than I do, right? So it's all these things are gonna affect him a little differently than me, but I'd like to hear from Eric. Eric has a lot of property, a lot of agricultural property. He's got some business property. Eric, I'd like to have you weigh in on some of the stuff, if you don't mind. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but
No, you're good. You're good. I mean,
there's a
from a
large
business,
and
from a business standpoint, it would be the quarry would be good for the community as far as from a business standpoint. I understand where Ron's coming from. I get it. If you look at the economic advantages for the county, I think it would bring a lot of economic incentives for the county. From a agriculture standpoint, I would rather have a commercial business than a housing development next to me. I mean, industrial type businesses would make better neighbors than, 100 house housing development. And that's my opinion. But I mean, like I say, I like what they've done with the buffering agriculture areas. I think that'll be beneficial for everybody.
After legal counsel has reviewed the document or continues to review, I would encourage you to release it to the county commissioners soon.
Right, we'll see. I'll shoot this off to Patrick in the morning and see how fast he can get back to us.
Super.
So can I ask a question? Is the steering committee split specifically on this class 3? Is that the specific route?
yeah,
of
that's the one thing
the
that
division?
there's not consensus on.
Okay.
To clear, I think there's a couple members one way and a couple members the other way.
For the folks, I know what class 3 is. I think probably everybody in the room does, but repeat what class 3 is for those that are listening in.
The heaviest of industrial uses, including asphalt plants, racetracks, quarries and mining, paper mills. There's a couple more, Tanya.
Landfills except inert debris, electricity generating facilities, that is not a solar farm, that's like a wind farm. Waste facilities, metal recycling and salvage facilities, cement manufacturing. That pretty much covers it.
Thank you.
the cement manufacturing is manufacturing of cement like put in bags or something in that nature or in bulk. It's not a concrete plant. Concrete plants are one, right? So there are, when we redid that HIDO several years ago, we tried to be fair. We went around and saw different businesses and the impact and the effects. And that's why we came up with some of this stuff. You know, we didn't want to restrict all businesses. We wanted to make them more compatible with the area. And I use the phrase constantly, and I still do, if you can't see it, taste it, or smell it, right? People are generally going to be okay with stuff. All right. All right. But, you know, I think with, like I said, when I looked at the properties, there's not going to be a lot. Class 3 is going to go in there without really having to buy, pricing them out of the market. I mean, really, especially at real estate prices nowadays. You know, you're not going to want to put $1 million asphalt plant and have to spend $5 million buying the property. Because a lot of it's going to be including homes. You're not going to get just a piece of property. It's going to have a home on it. That's going to be $400,000 or $500,000 with that to get that property. So you're not really going to have that. So that's why it didn't affect me so much when people were asking about doing away with class 3s. But again, the legal aspect of it. Now there was some research we came across that in Hillsborough, in the town of Hillsborough in Orange County, in their ETJ, their outside jurisdiction.
Extraterritorial jurisdiction.
They banned an asphalt plant. They banned asphalt plants from that area. All right. Obviously, they weren't going to put an asphalt plant in the town of Hillsborough. So they banned the asphalt plant. There was a challenge. Courts upheld it. Okay, so there was some legal precedence on that. Now, reading further, David Owens, he said, "Yep, there's no legal. I mean, it's not illegal to ban it, but he says he would use it as a last resort. So, you know, that's something that's going to have to be discussed, you know, for sure.
So
There's some things that I can.
The hypothetical, what I was getting at, when we got to a class 3 and we go through the zoning, the rezoning, the special use permit, we get to the point where the commissioners are meeting in this chamber. There's the public hearing, there's the quasi judicial. We're at the final thing. And my question is, at that point, regardless of whether they've passed all their muster, the petitioner, the commissioners have the final say so, and they can approve or not approve regardless of what everything else, for no other reason that it is not compatible with the neighborhood or it is not compatible with the land area that it's being sited in. So they still, even if we were to allow class 3 with all the stringent rules they have to follow, the commissioners still have the final say whether that potential business or industry's located and approved.
Correct.
So we have power there, even with allowing class 3s.
Way more than you have right now.
Right.
Right now, if you know, the current ordinance is written such that you meet the criteria, then
It's
approved.
allowed.
Yeah, pretty much.
The commissioners have no say so.
But now there would be two separate decisions: the legislative process, which would allow for a lot of public input for the rezoning, and then the special use permit, which would be a quasi judicial proceeding. And then the commissioners would make a call.
So you would still have that.
That's more so, I think there was talk about how many steps. That's more of a 3-step process, man. Would you say? I mean, is that how many? Is that what we talked about? Yeah. So to
The
give,
staff's going to review, the planning board's going to review, the public's going to have a say in it, and then the commissioners are going to have a say in it.
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure whether this is appropriate or not, but I particularly, seeing Senator Gailey here, would love to know what if you would permit her to give us her input. I'd be very interested in hearing that.
Well, absolutely.
Not trying to put you on the spot.
Do you have a particular question? I mean, it covered a lot of territory. Is there, can you narrow it down, my input on one?
I want your general impression about this ordinance, and I know that you probably have not seen a draft yet either. I know I have not.
No.
So it's kind of hard to comment on it, but do you think they're heading in the right direction?
Oh, yeah, I'm really pleased to see the progress that's been made in this policy space over the, well, since I filed for office on December 18th, 2015. And that was because I was concerned about the growth in Alamance County and the lack of tools that the county had to steer growth in the way that would benefit population the most, and traveling to Apex and traveling to Cary. Nothing against the people in Apex and Cary, but that's not what I think that we wanted to see our community look like. And to see us on a path to, you know, take charge of our own future and not have it dictated by corporations who are scanning the earth with their satellites, looking for places that they think they can insert their business interests. You know, feeling like our community is taking care of itself.
Right.
That's really pleasing to me.
Is Randolph County zoned?
Yes.
Like, okay, so when a big conglomerate industrial thing comes in, the rules are set, and that's just what it is. So there's no, my farm isn't, I mean, it's just, it's done, it's settled, everybody knows what the place is, everybody knows what you can build. So it's just like really smart. You don't have conflicts that come and creep in on you like that just because they don't mean any harm. It's just, it's available for them to do that. Because with a rock quarry, you don't buy land and develop rock. You have to buy the rock to develop it. So I was just curious if that in big industrial parks like that, you have to have the rules ahead of time. So the neighbors, this is just what it is. We either choose to stay or we go. So that would sound really smart, where everybody's protected and knows what their future is and knows the rules. Rules are always good.
I'm not sure it was quite as simple as that with Randolph County with placing that mega site there.
Yeah.
I think that there was some pressure from the community that they weren't real crazy about the idea of that site being in that location. And I don't really have personal knowledge about how that all transpired, so I wouldn't want my comments to be taken as evidence that it was all smooth sailing. For that project.
There's lots of new mega site signs down that area. So.
Yeah.
There's lots of new mega site signs down that area, Randolph County. So a lot of folks are very happy about that.
But I mean, they knew it was coming. And it was out in the open,
Yeah.
so to speak, because of zoning that was a set of rules that this is what we have to accept that comes in. I'm
Unless it was
sure
rezoned. for
somebody
something.
was like 15 feet in their backyard from something like that. It's like, no, but at least the rules were in place where you knew what to expect.
And there's a public decision-making process. I mean, that's the big thing that, you know, zoning brings forward is there's a decision-making process. It's open, transparent, and
Yeah,
there's plenty of opportunity to comment.
absolutely.
And that when I have driven to both the mega sites in Randolph County and Siler City, and of course they're undeveloped now. I mean, they're owned by whoever's owning that stuff. I mean, these are 2,000 and 1,900 acre pieces. You know, shoot, Guilford ran water and sewer from Greensburg down into Randolph County to have that mega site. It used to be agricultural. At some point, they went through a process of rezoning it or something like that. Had to be public hearings. There are plenty of mega site signs down there in Randolph County, but I wasn't paying attention to that. I know it was established a while ago. When Toyota was trying to get in there for a power plant, and then went to Alabama instead. So that's how they developed. They conglomerated together with total 5 sites to create their brand of the NC Carolina Core because they lost that Toyota plant. Now it sounds like they might get the Toyota battery plant. So I mean, that's just the way it works.
I would think that if, I don't think they're really super sites or mega sites is the question for Alamance County, because if they were, I think we'd already have one.
Yeah.
At this point, you know, there are a few ready industrial sites around the county, none of them
in Snow Camp that I'm aware of. I think that I really liked what Eric was saying about being concerned about the residential development. I think that's really the bigger concern for Snow Camp. And going back to what Commissioner Carter was saying about the farmers being concerned about what's going to happen with my land, you know, over time. Well, what's going to happen with your land if the neighbors develop around you and you're the last one holding the farm? Then you're going to be the one with the four-wheelers riding up and down your crop rows, tearing up your plants. You know, you're the one who's going to be left looking out your window, seeing somebody fishing in your pond, go out there and run them off, and maybe they'll lift off at you, tell you, call the sheriff. I don't care. He's not going to do nothing, or, you know, I'll be gone by the time he gets here. You're going to spend all your time worrying about somebody. Oh, so they've got their subdivision, their backyard. They put up a target in the back of their backyard because they think it's empty space. So they're just going to fire their guns at their target without a berm. And that's not empty space. That's your pasture. And that's your, how much is a cow? $800 for a cow? $1,200? Yeah, that's your livestock, you know? So those are the things that some of our older residents need to think about, is what kind of quality of life do you want to have? Running people off your property, got the sheriff on speed dial, and worried about your grandchild playing in the backyard, or going down, you want your grandchild to go down and play in the creek, or, you know, run around playing with their friends, playing paintball, and you're afraid to let them out there because they're going to get shot.
You know, I've heard them say, you know, as fast as some of these houses go up, the house can go up and somebody can be living in it before you're ready to put down manure.
Right.
And then that person's complaining because you put down manure.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
You smell it in their backyard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many different ways you're looking at the same situation, and it's,
And
I know I can't speak for anybody but myself, but we struggle with all of this. I know Amy and I had these conversations for a couple of years, and you know, there's more. Bill, how many times have we talked about the two sides of the issue, right?
That's right. Yeah.
I mean,
Change is hard. It really is.
And not all the farmers, when they go to check out to their heirs or whatever, because, you know, you got, just like down there on Clark Road, right down from the quarry, you have the Allens, which is a century farm. And Carolyn Hinshaw, she just built two big chicken houses for egg houses. Okay. So there are people that want to continue to farm. They want that. Not everybody's looking, well, look at that, they're going to check out and the heirs are going to, that's not always the case, right? They want to continue to farm. Ms. Hinshaw was concerned with how the quarry present, because she's worried about vibrations affecting her layers.
Sure.
So it can affect.
all kinds of things affect
That's
chickens
right.
laying eggs.
Quarry's going in, she's gonna have to deal with that, but that's, you know, that's some of her concern. As a farm, close to that quarry down there. So it can happen, whether it's quarry or asphalt plant or a landfill, you know. Landfill accidents happen in landfills too, you know. The liner can break or deteriorate over time and contaminate water supply. And that was one of the things with the DEQ and the Snow Camp residents, water protection. And I think they came to an agreement on that, and they felt pretty good generally, the residents.
Bill, the only reason I was smiling was when you said liner failure, whatever, Sherry started smiling. So you're right on target.
Yeah. So, I mean, those kind of things. So those are the things that I think even the farmers that really think about, like Amy said, the protections of their livelihood, even if it's in the short term. This thing will morph over time.
Well, I've talked to farmers all across North Carolina and all across the United States, as far as that goes. Almost without exception, there are more issues with development, housing development, butting up against agricultural land everywhere than there are any other use of that land. That's where the problems is, as Senator Gailey says, when you They think your cropland is their four-wheeler track. They think that your property is a park and it's fair game and we can ride on it and we can hunt on it or we can shoot on it or we can, it's open, it's free, and here we go.
That's exactly right. Somebody said, they move into the subdivision, they look across, they see all this open space, they say, oh, I always want to learn how to deer hunt. They watch some YouTube videos, they go to Dick's Sporting Goods, they get themselves suited up to buy a deer stand, and the farmer's out on his tractor, looks out the edge of his field, says, where'd that deer stand come from?
Yeah.
Takes a look at it, looks at where this deer stand is pointed, and there's a rifle aimed at their backyard. Because the person who's doing it has no idea what they're doing, where they set up a deer stand, you know?
We've took down 2 deer stands in the last month. I mean, they don't learn till you throw them back over the fence and they figure it out eventually. Some of them do, some of them don't.
I'm sorry you have to deal with that, that's all.
Well, this gives us a plan. If we did this, if we don't have a plan, we get what we get. And that's kind of just
Absolutely.
boiling it all down. That's kind of the way I see it.
And one more question, it's probably for, I guess everybody really. If this thing, as we go through in the meeting schedule there, trying to do a public hearing and going through all this, we're gonna do another workshop, talk about it some more and all that. There's a moratorium in Snow Camp that ends when, end of March? or
March 1st, something like
in
that.
the beginning of March.
Beginning of
So there is kind of a little bit of deadline. If we can't get this thing right, everybody feels comfortable, is there opportunity to extend that? We've already went for a year on that. Is there opportunity to extend that? I'm just thinking if.
That's a legal question.
That's something Deborah would have to look at. I mean, when we first started talking about this, state law guidance really that year was pushing
Right.
really
right.
into the limit. Now, Deborah can look at that and see 160D has also come into play since then, and that changed the playing field a little bit. Now, what it means to that, they have to look at, but some different statutes have come into play, so we have to see how that would work with what we want to do. You're seeing that December 20th, and I know y'all are going, that's right at Christmas. But to get to the goal that we're trying to get to, and it being before March, anticipating more February, we're being encouraged to pull that time frame in order to do that, I've got to get us to a public workshop, get that input and get that input into a draft to bring to the planning board and then bring to the commission. So that's why that deadline that looks so close, depending on tonight's meeting as to what that felt like. But we want to give 2 weeks notice to people that if we're going to hold that, which means by Monday, I gotta start cooking everything. That's why we're here tonight.
We might want to check with Deborah quickly. I just, when I saw that meeting date, it really hit me because a lot of people will be traveling that week.
So briefly talk to Patrick, not about the specific date, but of that week. And we'll go back to him about this class 3 and see how he feels about that. There's no real notice requirement for this public workshop. There's nothing on law or whatever. But to be fair, we want to give people at least a couple weeks.
Right.
notice. But we'll ask Patrick and them about that.
And it's tricky because, Christmas being on a Saturday this year is like 2 weeks out of the month or kind of like, that's the Monday before the Saturday. So it's pretty far away, really. But the other option would be kick it after New Year's, but then you're dealing with the same thing. It's like the week after New Year's. So in order to get it in before the next planning board. So,
Let's go and get it over with.
And the only thing I will say is I think there's a commissioners meeting on the 20th that evening. It'd be nice to do it on a night that the commissioners could join us at the public workshop and chat with the
We'll
the residents.
We'll have a county commission meeting. We will not be able to.
So none of the commissioners would be able to benefit from that public input or that public interaction.
That's right.
We chat a lot.
Just something to think about. get it in before Christmas, but maybe looking at a different date, just so the commissioners that were able to join us could take advantage of getting a lot of that firsthand information from the residents.
And I would
And some
request,
feedback.
that we really get stacked with meetings, as you know. So as much notice as we possibly could receive would be helpful. And just coordinate it with Sherry or Tanya, Ryan, whomever. Because they'll have our schedules to a large extent.
Will it be set up like the last one where it's kind of floating in and?
Well, I think,
Discussions on that.
yeah, we're talking about that. There might be a short presentation.
You gonna do it at your fire department?
Probably.
Probably
I
it's
like that.
location.
I like that venue.
If you wanna have a presentation, I mean, the school gymnasium might be better.
We do know that there's that wall with the TV, but we're still exploring that. So
Yeah.
filling out what we're going to do at the meeting will tell us what kind of place we need.
Just like it was
Schools
schools,
just,
yeah,
no,
not
I
really
really
the
wanted
commissioners
extra
understood it was
public
more
everything.
informal, so you could
Sure,
kind of,
we
it's
did the
floating.
public hearing.
Right.
Yeah.
State.
Yeah.
Thing went there.
They're not allowing a lot of parents in the schools and stuff, so we have to basically ask really nicely to see if they let us just bring everybody in the world into the school right now.
That was pre-virus.
And Bill, you get into one other issue, public notice is one, quorums for the county commissioners is another. Yeah, this is a public meeting, anybody can be here, so it's not an issue on the quorum for this meeting, but it needs to be something that we can discuss and it's probably open to the public with public notice.
Do you guys remember Green Acres? I'm really
Yeah.
dating myself. Remember those wealthy people come in and started. She was hysterical. Mr. Haney, my dad was always called Mr. Haney because he always had anything you could buy. And I just remember that, how they would just come in and Arnold the pig, and they worked it out. So I'm talking about two different lifestyles. That was interesting. She never wore gingham. I remember that. They worked it out.
I'm glad I'm not old enough to remember that shit.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, is that it? Anything else?
About it for me.
Moving through the agenda, we do have the announcement of the Christmas dinner. And Taylor, do you have a date on that?
15.
No, December 15th, we're at the cutting board at 7 p.m. So if everybody can RSVP, Rodney has to give a total number middle next week, I think. So go and just let us know who else, and that's open to spouses. So there'll be 2 for mom, and whoever else, so we make sure we give them like a
It's a Wednesday.
The 15th, right? Are we doing our regular planning board meeting?
Yes, we are. We'll be seeing a lot of you all in the next 2 weeks. So your next meeting is next Thursday night at 7 p.m. in this chamber. You'll be exploring the RV park.
I'll be out of town, but I'm gonna join by.
Perfect. The regular meeting is next Thursday the 9th. And the big dinner is 12:15 at 7 p.m. Seven o'clock. We don't start.
All right,
It's all staff out.
so I think we're next up is the adjournment.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.